Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. We're focusing next on the economy. And Mr. Tokwe Fashua, an economist, joins us next to discuss that matter. Good morning. Thank you for coming.
Morning. How are you guys doing?
Well, we're doing good, but you know, for a lot of people, economy, in fact, they think economy should be the main subject matter, the main essence, the major determinant to elect who should lead this country for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
Well, the NASG came up with what they describe as the 2023 macroeconomic outlook. They're looking back to 2022, how it performed, and perhaps may guide as a way, a template or a springboard to see what may likely happen, what we should expect, and how things may turn out. And there was this, in that huge report, there's this part that they looked at as though they called it the 6 themes that drove Nigeria's socio-economic narrative in 2022. Several of them, in no particular order. They said Nigeria faced a combination of cost push and demand pull inflationary pressure. Economic growth relapsed as the oil sector remained in contraction. Rising interest rates in the global markets dampened investors' confidence. Nigeria's external vulnerability was amplified despite favorable trade outcomes. Monetary policy tightens to curtail inflationary pressure, and then weak fiscal performance pushed the country closer to a fiscal cliff. What a 2022 we have. So for some of these things, they resonate with you, don't they?
They do. I mean, I think they're spot on. You can't fault that. You know, I think they basically have the grounds covered. But you know, I think the real linchpin there is the fiscal underperformance. Monetary policy did well and went into overdrive, as it were. As we all know, the monetary policy people, which is central bank, have done all they need to do and also made some incursion into the fiscal space with the interventions that they've done over time, for which many times they are criticized. However, you know, when inflation started inching up, 18%, 19%, went into the 20% region, the Monetary Policy Committee, which is housed under the central bank, had to begin a process of increasing interest rates. Till date, they've increased by about 450 basis points, which is 4.5%. And people are asking, you know, that itself can precipitate a recession. It has been seen in other jurisdictions to precipitate a recession when you increase interest rate with a view to slowing down inflation. Now, also, inflation hasn't quite slowed down, but for the last quarter, where we've seen about 0.14% reduction in inflation rate, perhaps we've now hit that inflection point, hopefully, where we'll now begin to see a trending down of inflation rate. I'm hoping this week, I think they're going to have another MPC's meeting. I'm hoping that they would hold rates and watch rather than continue to increase rate. Because again, continuing to increase rates makes life tougher for manufacturers, for borrowers in general. And of course, you want to, at some point, you know, open up the economy, you know, make it easier for people to borrow, create new business, and also create employment, you know. But the fiscal space is where the problem is, because you'd see the ministers of finance, you know, always complaining about how we have a revenue problem. But then what are you doing about it, you know? So getting the revenues up is a very difficult task. Oftentimes, I think you'd have to also approach the National Assembly to put a few laws in place, because no matter what policies you put in place, if it's not backed by law, it's not likely to fly. And of course, even if it flies, if you're able to get everybody around the table to agree and say, you know, I mean, we're talking about manufacturers associations and so on, but when it's not backed by law, the next administration is likely to reverse it, because it's always a competition of interest, if you ask me. But I think that we have space in this country to grow that revenue. You know, I have even just one, if you like, killer app, if I could use that word, you know, to grow revenue in this country. I think there's money. I mean, this morning I woke up and when I checked my Facebook, it was a friend who was sharing the news of a certain gentleman in Lagos who's celebrating his 50th with a 152 million naira Lexus Jeep 2022 edition, whatever. You know, and you know, in Nigeria we pay cash for those things. It's not like abroad where people have to pay a little bit and then they deduct money. We pay cash money. So, you know, there's cash flow, but it seems not to be flowing. Well, if you look at Nigeria, you know, most parts of Nigeria, we don't pay property taxes. We live in very lovely houses. Even if at all they ask us to pay 5,000 naira per annum, people still resist. They say, are you the one that built my house for me? Are you the one that put the borehole? Yeah, all of those things are immaterial. The point is that we have to look for, government has to follow the money. And when you follow the money, you'll be able to get a little bit from there and use it for the deficit areas. And of course, government has to be responsible, a lot more responsible around the usage of these revenues that they're talking about.
Well, you talked about, you know, the fact that there is potential to up our revenues. And I think you know, perhaps that will be the biggest challenge for the incoming government. But in the meantime, you know, we have so many leaks. Subsidy is a big conundrum that we're yet to really wrap our heads around. Is taking up so much of the little revenue that is coming into the country. And even as we speak, you know, the so-called petrol, which we're supposed to be subsidizing, is very scarce. You know, so there is that one on the hand, and crude oil theft dealt us also a very big blow last year as well. Then we also saw ways and means. The fact that, you know, as a result of the underperformance in these areas, we're burrowing ourselves into a deeper hole. Where would you say, because some people will say that, well, this administration is already ebbing out. And those who are saying that maybe you should scrap subsidy before it goes. Would you first of all think that that is a wise idea?
Well, it's an idea that needs to be really, really managed. Because again, I mean, you talked about crude oil theft. You know, for some reason, I think the current administration took his eyes off the ball. You can see that now, from November last year till now, we are beginning to gain some grounds back. But some people say, yeah, that was when they signed on Tom Polo. I mean, so again, everywhere in the world where you have resources like that, you have to involve the community. You know, you can't bring in mercenaries from outside to protect. It's going to break down after a while. So maybe they have to go back to Tom Polo and co and say, guys, secure these assets. And indeed, as of last month, as of December, we went back to being, you know, the largest producers in Africa again. We had come to number 3, behind Angola, behind Algeria, you know. So now we're back to number 1, as it were. So we're hoping that, I mean, I think they're talking about 1.6 million barrels today, as of now, which is great. Can we, you know, whatever arrangement they're putting in place, continuous engagement, you know, let's secure that part of the economy, you know, which is very important. Even though it's also an opportunity in disguise for us to develop other parts of the economy, because if you look at our budget on a yearly basis, the only assumption that's made is crude oil. And I've had to challenge even the current minister, you know, very in a nice way to say, guys, why are we only thinking about, when you prepare a budget, the first thing you put there is crude oil, 1.6 million barrels a day at X amount of dollars. Now, let me say this. Well,
it might not be
the biggest, it wasn't. Come think of it.
The biggest
it's the
GDP
biggest
contributor.
dollar. Perhaps it used to be the biggest dollar earner. When last did NNPC remit anything? That's what you ask yourself. So we just have there, putting a huge contraption there. You know, it's like a big grapefruit with no juice in it. So it used to be the biggest revenue earner. Indeed, now the non-oil sector is doing a lot better than the crude oil sector. So we just do that. So again, so we not only fall into the subsidy trap, because again, what is this subsidy? We're not even sure. And it seems like the government couldn't use the instrumentality, the power that is government, to interrogate and know exactly, number one, how much of this petrol are we bringing in, you know, on a daily basis? How much are we using? Do you know what? I conducted a research around, you know, in terms of, petrol usage in Niger, in Cameroon, in Chad, in Benin Republic. These are our neighbors. All of them are francophone. And do you know that they don't even use a fifth altogether? Cameroon uses about 58,000 liters a day. How many do we, barrels a day in terms of liters? Nigeria uses about 445, according to the law. That's the one we sterilize from our daily production for local usage. Chad uses less than 5,000. Benin Republic uses about 25,000. Niger Republic about 25,000. So all of them use about less than maybe about 100,000 barrels. So even what we say we're bringing in and we're losing to our neighbors by smuggling has to go beyond these countries that I mentioned. It has to go as far as Mauritania, as far as Congo Republic. That means that someone is lying. I mean, people just sit down and cook figures for us. So subsidies, yes, need to be let go, but how? Are you going to have it gradually? How do you ensure that it doesn't cause pandemonium? Because if you suddenly remove subsidies and the prices of everything shoots up to 200%, how do you manage that? And you're going to have people on the streets. That has brought down governments in the past.
And speaking about
so we have to be careful about that. However, indeed, we have now agreed that because of the fraud underpinning this subsidy thing, yes, it has to go at some point.
And speaking about those basic prices, looking at all of those economic review of how it performed in 2022 as put up by NESG, what should the common man out there expect? I mean, if you look at it, basic things such as bread, maybe a little bit of the high-end one, which was about 300, 350 at the time, within a space of 7 years, now you're looking at between 1,000 and 1,003 or 1,005. Bags of rice, bags of beans, the same things. So what should they expect this time, this year? Because all of these figures won't just go back to what they used to be, no matter who you elect. Moving forward.
Indeed, yes. I think that whoever is going to take over this government come May 29, let's even put it this way. If we're talking about 2023, it's half and half. This current administration still has a bit of time, if they're going to be
achieved, if they're going to policy-wise,
I believe it's
that will impact on
policy implementation-wise. Indeed, a lot of some policies are in place that can work, and of course, governance is something you do on a daily basis, and listen, in their own interest, for example, look at this fuel thing, scarcity thing that Mark mentioned earlier on. And now in some places, in fact, the pump price is 300 naira. In fact, I've seen 500 naira maybe somewhere in Lagos. Wow. And people are still queuing to buy. Now, so they're going to have to ask themselves, are we going to leave this at 500 naira? Or what do we do? How do we intervene? Now, in controlling the prices of fuel, for example, in looking at that for the purpose and to assist the common man, there are several things you can do. The government has instrumentality to check international prices, to call those, NNPC, I believe, still imports all the fuel in, so what exactly is causing the snafu, as it were, so intervene. Is it funding they need? Is it what? They may decide to intervene, or they may also decide to let market forces begin to take over, in which case it's probably going to end up around that kind of numbers I mentioned. And then, of course, but however, it will be said that they came in at 87 and took it to 500, which and that's for some. However, again, now the issue then becomes inflation is a big issue. Inflation, that's where it affects the common man. And what we have realized about inflation beyond the textbook is that the price you pay for a good depends on your negotiating ability. Forget about this concept of equilibrium. Equilibrium is a very nice concept on paper. It doesn't exist. What is the equilibrium price of Gary, for example? You can negotiate with your customer at any point in time in the market. So in the same way, what that means is that if you have a good, where the seller holds the bigger hand, all right, he can absolutely dictate the price. In which case, there may be times,
if the seller, for instance, got it at a certain price,
how do you know?
She has to cover his bottom line.
That's the thing. Now, you see, in talking about economics, you have to also look at social psychology. So, if for example, I'm a fuel importer, remember 2011 when we had this huge scandal? It was a case where people were coming and saying, well, this is how much I bought it, And I think that's why NNPC is the one importing now. I'm not sure they've changed that regime. It had to be a case of NNPC, but NNPC itself needs to be interrogated. So now, if you tell me that this is how much you've bought it, how do I know? You have more advantage in that market, in dictating what happens in that market than I do. In which case, if government wants to do the right thing for the people, it's a case of saying, yes, whereas you're a private sector player, but you're still under me as a regulator, you're under the regulator. Can we then expect that the right thing will happen between the regulator and the operator in that regard to know exactly how much it came in, and circumstances of you having to sell at that point. That's why you see that the deregulation that we're talking about in the market is not about absence of regulation. In fact, when they talk about deregulation, it means better, more transparent regulation of the market. And of course, the fact that the common man should not get the short end of the stick.
And the elephant in the room, foreign exchange.
Yes.
As an import-dependent country, we continue to see how the parallel market, I was looking for the right word.
Yeah, they said they should stop calling it black market. But why is it not black market if it's black?
It's not people's reality.
The parallel market, continues to drive prices and continues to dictate trends. And the CBN continues to say, well, they're still, they're not recognizing that market.
Yes, they cannot.
Understandably so, but how did they begin? Because rates at some point must converge. If people are going to do things right, if people are going to go through the system to do things, we cannot continue to let the parallel market dictate prices, can we? Now let me just let you know that, let's call it the black market. There's nothing wrong about calling it the black market. The parallel market, the idea begins to give it a sort of legitimacy. It's an illegitimate market. And this market exists in every country. In the United States, for example, there's probably a market for dollar, okay, and for exchange in other currencies, controlled by the mafia people in New York or those who are in the drug business. If you are going to access that market, you're taking a big risk. The difference with Nigeria is that the parallel market, or the so-called black market, which you now call parallel market, is there in the open, is the most accessible. It's not seen as anything wrong anymore. The market that should exist in Nigeria should be the BDC market and the I&E window market. And those two markets should be the same. That's what we're saying. So the BDC, the point is that, of course, unfortunately, the central bank has about 6,000 licenses out in different people's hands. And there's what they call, which I heard the president of the BDC Association called ungoverned spaces. There's about 10,000 different other entities selling dollars in the so-called BDC market. That market needs to be streamlined so that the central bank can better control what goes on in that market. And if they have to intervene in that market as a player, not as not as the prime mover, as a player, then so be it. The I&E window is the one that's more transparent now. I think it's driven by FMDQ in Lagos. Financial Market Dealers quote is part of that. So everybody goes in there to stake it, and you can see that that market ticks on a minutely basis. You see, and that's the market. That's where we should look. And perhaps the BDCs, if they are better organized, should benchmark that market. In which case, you then have a fusion. You see, what's called the black market can never be integrated into the official market. It is going to be driven. It is supposed to be driven on the ground. It can never, and it should not.
However, what perhaps the issue becomes is that, is the central bank going to be ready to meet people's requirement between the I&E window and the BDC window? Meet people's requirement for Form A transactions, invisible trade. People are traveling abroad for. I believe they can give it a shot. Honestly speaking, I believe they can give it a shot. And the rest of the market will, you see the called black market, you have to go on the ground. If you're going to deal on the ground, for example, people standing under trees and so, whatever you get there, they have to let you know. And that's what the next administration must do, even though this administration. And let me tell you, some of the, that in every market there's psychology involved. You'll be shocked. So what we're trying to say now is this. Now, where the problem is, Chamberlain, is that the demand for example, corruption money. If you wanted to pay ₦1 billion to some sitting politician, in bribes now, you can't take a cash to him. And you can see that the central bank is even making it even more difficult with this new, tendency towards, cashless society, with the currency change and all of that. So I think that the institutions are doing the right thing. And I think that the institution also needs the support of people like us and the person on the street, So all of that is that they're doing the right thing by moving towards cashless. My main thing about the cashless is how, first of all, you can see that they have now put a law in place to say no more cash withdrawal from public account. Why is anybody withdrawing cash in a public account? To do what? You know, and so there's this corruption aspect, issues of drug dealing, issues of all of that kind of illegal transaction, prostitution, all this kidnapping and all of that, that depends on the dollar. Now, it will then give the security services, you know, a leaner focus
Mr.
to focus on some of those things and reduce them. Perhaps
indeed, the institutions are doing the right thing, and nobody's asking that, you know, the parallel market be, you know, be integrated into the sector.
The point is that
the thing is this, that, you know, there has to be disincentivization. It cannot be possible.
How you're thinking?
I'm not the one answering questions.
You know,
I'm not the one answering questions.
You know, I like the word you use, disincentivize.
If it is not disincentivized, you know, there are questions as to how it is that, you know, you'll be having this I&E window. Even the BDCs, the licensed BDCs, are selling the dollars that they get at the so-called rates of the black market. They're not selling at the CBN rate. Because
there needs to be a certain reform of the BDC, and it's political. I wish that Buhari would have been able to do it, you know. A lot of the guys who stand under the trees are from northern Nigeria, so to speak. I believe that if Buhari calls them together and says, guys, this can't continue.
Why must it be him? Why can't the CBN governor?
You don't understand that the currency of a country is not something for the central bank governor to handle. The currency of a country is the country. It's the representation of the country. If you have a good currency, you have good people. You have
but we've seen the EFCC clamp down on such people.
And therefore, forget all the EFCC. The president has a role to play. And whoever comes after this president also has a role to play. I just believe that Buhari could have sent out a word, called them. A lot of those guys can be incentivized to get out of that market. A lot of them. A lot of the guys you see under the trees are touts who are doing the hustling for the big men down there. You can actually reform the BDC sector.
Fasho, you have that sort of market in existence, and then you now say that, you know, you're putting rules in place for the banking system.
You have to do what you have to do.
We're going cashless.
Absolutely. You have to do what you have to keep moving.
People are just wondering,
you're not going to wake up. You're not going to
How is this going to help our economy?
Absolutely will help. I mean, I told you one, you know, the fact that you're stopping cash withdrawal in public sector, bang on. You're going to have more value for money. It's going to be more difficult for people to get cash to deliver for corruption. Because now that you are having to withdraw, you can only withdraw fewer money and cash and all of that. It's going to reduce. So if you're a contractor and the man is saying, go and bring this one, so, where will I find the cash? And we have to move to that direction. We need that cashless more than any economy in the world. You know, so now what they call value for money in public procurement, the fact that for now is about only 30% of that budget that you see, 23 trillion, on the capital side especially, only 30% actually gets to do what it needs to do. Now, if you go more cashless, you mean that you have to do transfer for most of the things that you have to buy. Then you're going to see that 30% moving to about 60, 70%. That's an achievement.
When you talk about this cashless, you know, affecting the value for money, maybe you should explain a little further.
Absolutely.
Because there are basic things that people expect to happen if we have to have that huge kind of impact we want on the value of the naira. We don't have uninterrupted power supply. Manufacturing is suffering. It's almost next to zero. If you don't fix these two things, no matter these policies you put in place, how will the value of the naira suddenly jump up?
So basically, if you ask me about power, for example, I have my own thinking around that. And I think that what should happen is that we should press in every source of power or of energy that we have, including the coal. If there's still coal in Enugu, we have to go back to it. We saw that the same countries that were pushing green energy and all of that stuff, when they had their backs to the wall, Germany and co, they went back to their coal. And then they come to Africa and say, oh, those sources of energy. I was in 2014, I was in Zambia, 2016 rather. I was in Zambia in the AFDB meeting when a bitter argument occurred between Akumi Adesina and a certain American woman, I don't know who she was, who was pushing this idea that Africa should forget every other source and go green. And Adesina was of the opinion that, look, forget it. You guys are taking your own whatever. It was a very bitter argument, one-on-one. These guys were right there on the rostrum. That you guys are doing your own, taking your own resource and so on. So my thinking around power is that every source, and I think that also the universities and polytechnics should step up. The departments that are relevant, energy and co, we should do a lot more experiments in the communities around them, such that I think that rural electricity, electrification should be powered by those experimental things, you know, at the universities and so on, so that the federal government and co can deal with the urban areas and the industry. That's one. You mentioned power. You mentioned what
manufacturing.
Manufacturing. You see that part of what we're trying to achieve with some of this cashless thing is to also bring in more money into the banking sector for on-lending, all right, to the manufacturing sector. And you can see that, of course, you know, this present administration may have got it wrong on a number of things, but I think one thing they've done, which part of which I support, is the fact that they've really tried to take the attention of Nigerians towards local manufacturing and value addition. Even if you call it maybe, you know, these 43 items that central banks saying, look, we're not supporting with foreign exchange. The furniture industry, for example, has exploded in Nigeria. If you went to any furniture shop now, chances are that you're buying a Nigerian product, you know, labeled as a Turkish product.
At a very exorbitant price.
Well, you know, so that money, they're making profit. If it's exorbitant, but they're making profit, that money comes back into the system. A lot of people have money in this country. Then the fiscal aspect then comes in. How are you getting your tax? Let me tell you one thing very quickly. In the UK, I've done business in the UK before, my company. In the UK, what they do is that you cannot run a company account except you get in a given year, except you get your annual returns from the company house, which is the CAC we have in Nigeria. Only about 3% of companies in this country get their annual returns. And in order for you to get your annual return, you have to show evidence of tax payment. If any government asks me, I'll say that we implement that policy in Nigeria. Nobody can run a company account in this country except you show your annual returns. And you cannot show your annual returns except you pay your tax, even if it's minimum tax. If you do that, the collections will explode in this country. So I wonder, you know, that a lot of our people, maybe they don't have the exposure, well, those who run the
government
economy.
People have got to lead by example.
You know, I don't know why then, exactly.
The way they spend public funds.
Absolutely. I mentioned that earlier, Chamberlain, you know, it's clear. You know, if you are collecting money from people and you're using it to ensconce yourself in so much luxury and all of that, buying all sorts of things, traveling everywhere, anyhow. In fact, I would say that the next government should be thinking of working for free.
Not a bad idea. Because if including all those...
at least to a certain extent, maybe a couple of years, work for free.
I don't know if they can do without the ESTA codes and all of those things because it's huge. Sakwe Fasho, as an economist, thank you for your time, as always.